The Evil Within is pretty weird to talk about. Being the first horror IP to be directed by Shinji Mikami since Resident Evil 4, the hype machine for this game was huge. However, on its release, most people were disappointed, citing the 30 FPS lock, a story that made no goddamn sense, and letterboxing that you couldn't turn off as major flaws.
Secondly, in a game trailer's preview for new horror IP The Evil Within, the dude selling it says that not being able to see the floor adds to the atmosphere. You what?
So is there something redeemable about it 7 years down the line? Yeah, I think so. The good news is that the current PC port is pretty good. Steam has a habit of not really caring about its PC ports, with more than a few being borderline unplayable without some patching. The game still has a framerate lock, but it's been raised to 60. There's also some Steam guides to unlock it completely. I didn't do that because I didn't really care enough. You can turn off the letterboxing. Nice, now I can see more than 2/3 of my screen. The Evil Within is a 2014 game, and it looks like a 2014 game. The environmental textures are pretty low res, but more front and center things like models, particles, and lighting look really good, with a couple of exceptions I'll get to in a second. It's also carried by some pretty sick art direction. I mean sick both in the sense of it looks cool, but also, like, literally, it's pretty disgusting. This game is a fucking splatterfest. I will say if you're photosensitive at all, you might want to skip this one. This game has a lot of really harsh visual effects for when stuff gets more surreal. Color filters, flashing lights, and blinding lights are pretty commonplace. The most egregious example of this is found whenever you use the mirror. It's a slow zoom in that turns your entire screen a bright white. There's no setting to tweak to make this easier on the eyes, so all I can say is to look away from your monitor whenever you use the mirror. About those exceptions I mentioned, one of them is about the gore. It has a weird relationship with the lighting engine. As you can see here, even in the dark, it's incredibly distinct and also reflecting a light source that's nowhere near it. The gore doesn't just stain the environment, it'll stain character models as well, which sounds cool, but in execution this man looks like he's covered in tomato soup, and the lighting problem is even worse. There's also this one particle effect that is, like, really out of place bad. The enemy variety is kinda the bare minimum. You're pretty much just gonna be fighting dudes the entire game, though effort has been made to make these dudes distinct both visually and in gameplay. Some dudes wear different outfits, some dudes have melee weapons, some dudes have guns, some dudes have masks that give them headshot protection, some dudes are fucking bullshit. Where the visual design of the enemies really shines is in the bosses, and yeah, some of it is pretty derivative, but there is effort made to make each monster feel at least slightly unique. The creature design on display for enemies that aren't just dudes is gorgeous. It's exactly the kind of viscerally twisted body horror that makes me love games like this. Beyond the enemies, the environments can have some pretty solid atmosphere. They're at their prettiest when they're making effective use of harsh lighting. I find the daytime sections a lot less appealing. I think it looks a bit too washed out and bland compared to the sections where the game turns the lights off. So visually the game is pretty good, but the sound design is on another level.
Let go of me! Let go of me!
Fine. 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 Fine.
The Evil Within isn't afraid to make effective use of near-dead silence as a form of ambiance, which is weird for a Shinji Mikami game. I'm really glad that it does. It starkly juxtaposes the moments where shit hits the fan. When you're in guns blazing mode, the game feels normal, but it's so tense during the quiet moments because you just know the game is cooking up some insane shit to ambush you with when you least expect it. The sound design during the more intense moments is just as impeccable. The gun sounds, while unremarkable, are still bassy and powerful, and the gore sounds match, being wet, chunky, and excruciatingly detailed. Even if you disregard the visuals completely, the combat still feels incredible, just endlessly satisfying. If you ever get tired of the chaotic brutality, there's no need to worry because the moments of respite are well placed and reinforce the stereotype of survival horror games paradoxically having some of the most relaxing music in gaming. About that mirror I mentioned earlier, you stare at it to be teleported to a pocket dimension where you can save your game. You'll always hear these mirrors before you see them because they're accompanied by Claire de Lune of all things. It's very relaxing to listen to because, well, it's Claire de Lune, but also it's got this old-timey, grainy gramophone filter thing over it. I don't know how to describe it. Have a listen. It reminds me of the first album of Everywhere at the End of Time. Very relaxing, yet very somber. You know that it can't last forever. The sound does have a couple of pitfalls. One of them is about some of the monsters. A lot of them use stock sounds. There's this one dog boss that uses a ton of them. But unfortunately, I don't have any footage of that because Shadowplay is a really cool program that likes to randomly stop recording and not fucking tell me. Also, I have no idea what the hell causes this, but sometimes, whenever a mirror bursts open, the sound breaks and ruptures your eardrums. This only happened twice in my playthrough, and restarting the game made it stop, but still, wow, what the fuck. Alright, I've banged on about presentation long enough. How do you actually play this game? The gameplay loop is the expected Shinji Mikami survival horror affair, consisting largely of killing enemies, scavenging for supplies used to kill enemies, disarming traps, getting own-zoned by traps, and having boss fights. In the downtime between all this insanity, you retreat into the mirror. I already mentioned that it's where you save your game, but that's not the only thing you do. Scattered around the environment, on enemies and inside breakables is green gel. This pickle juice looking stuff is your upgrade material. Once you're inside the mirror dimension, you sit down in the Mike Pence approved chair and hotwire the pickle juice directly into your neurons to increase the magazine size on your revolver. Don't think about that sentence for too long. You can upgrade everything from your health bar to damage, reload speed, carrying capacity, pretty much the stuff you expect. The green gel has a couple of its own issues, but I'll save that for later. Also, while you're inside the mirror dimension, you'll be spending your keys. The keys are found in angel statues in secret areas around the environment. You use them to open lockers, which typically have very large quantities of ammo, green gel, health syringes, or, more keys. I say they're found in secret areas with a grain of salt. Usually they're hidden, but sometimes they do shit like this. You know, at this point I want to go in there just out of spite. Before I talk about anything else specific, I need to mention the movement. It's off. Whenever you move in a direction, your character has to take a fraction of a second to physically turn to face that direction. You can only strafe and backpedal when you're aiming down sights, but otherwise the movement feels awkward and unresponsive. You can sprint as well, but this is one of those games where you sprint for like 2 seconds and then get tired. I'm pretty sure ProZD made a skit about this. Also, the sprint meter lies to you. It says you have 3 seconds of sprint, but you actually have like 2 seconds of sprint and 1 second of limping and having an asthma attack. You can alleviate this somewhat by upgrading the sprint meter, but to be honest, the sprint issue is minor. You're not going to do much sprinting to get through the environment unless you want to suffer death by explosive trap. Boy howdy, are we gonna have a talk about traps. One more thing, for whatever reason, you can't aim and shoot while you're crouched. I think it's because of these motion-activated explosive traps. If you're crouched next to them, they're harmless, but if you're standing, they start beeping at you with intent to explode. So the game will put you in situations where you need to shoot an enemy but also need to stay crouched to not get exploded, leading to this awkward dance of standing for half a second to shoot and then crouching immediately afterward. I didn't like it at first, but it kinda grew on me. I like the extra layer of tension this limitation provides, even if it doesn't make any sense. The guns are your standard survival horror fashion. Pistol, shotgun, machine gun, sniper rifle, elemental crossbow, World War II era stick bombs, it's all there. They all feel great to use, thanks largely to the sound design, but the power hierarchy among them has a bit of an oddity. I'm sure you've played a shooter like this that has an array of standard weapons, but one ridiculous exotic thing, usually unique from game to game. The Evil Within is no different, but the oddity is in the implementation. Where other shooters typically heavily restrict the use of the overpowered weirdo gun, this game embraces it. It's rare to say for any shooter that the top tier weapon is a crossbow. If you still have any doubt, I want you to know this game has a crafting system and it's literally only used to make bolts for this crossbow. You craft them from parts you gain by disarming traps, so you have a reason to put yourself at risk and challenge the Dead by Daylight skill check. Time it right and you can craft more bolts. Time it wrong and get the Review Tech USA experience.
Skip it up and that up.
Outside of the crossbow, the other weapons are functionally unremarkable, pretty much exactly what you would expect, except for the matches. A lot of these types of horror games like to play around with enemies that are pretending to be dead. Usually you solve this by foot checking them or just shooting them, and the Evil Within is no different in that regard. But the matches add an extra layer of depth to this jump scare tactic stroke trust exercise. You can press a button to drop a match on any body that's lying down, living or dead. When the match lands, that body catches fire, and if it was alive, it is now no longer alive. What makes the system interesting is when you catch more than one enemy with these matches. Time the animation right just as an enemy is walking over the body and... What the hell, why didn't it work? Time the match drop to right as an enemy walks over the body and they'll be instantly... Are you fucking serious? Drop this fucking thing, pixel frame perfect, and fuck, finally, there we go, you'll insta-kill the standing enemy as well. Look, I never said it was a perfect system. So that's most of what the player can do, but what about the enemies? What do they challenge you with? The Evil Within has 4 difficulty modes: Casual, Survival, Nightmare, and, after finishing the game for the first time, Akumu. Here's a funny gaming moment for you. Akumu in Japanese translates to Nightmare, and there's already a difficulty called Nightmare. They're the same shit, but this one is more intense because it's in Japanese. I'm pretty sure ProZD had a skit on this as well.
Fuck you, Sasuke!
Well, anyway, my playthrough was on Survival, and, yeah.
This is 10% pain, 20% pain, 15% concentrated power of pain, 5% pain, 50% pain, 100% reason to remember the name.
Anything other than casual is a challenge, and due to how much this game likes its insta-kill mechanics, your deaths will be frequent. This sounds frustrating, but the Evil Within takes a similar approach to fail states as games like Dead Space and Resident Evil, accompanying player failure with brutal animated kill moves. Although they're not nearly as well made as the ones in Dead Space, they still act as a strong incentive to not die. Or if you're a weirdo like me and you like this shit, they serve as a much more grim form of catharsis. Alongside that, the autosaves are very generous. You'll lose at most like 3 minutes of progress for a death. The point I'm trying to get across here is the game is hard, for sure, but it never really felt unfair, at least not to me. Well, except for when bullshit like this happens. I don't...
What?
I was originally gonna have this be a one-off gag, but this was such a constant occurrence throughout the entire game I had to devote more time to it. I thought it was a bug at first, but after playing long enough I realized that no, this is intentional. I didn't look it up or anything, I just completely misinterpreted the meaning of one of the handgun upgrades. The accuracy upgrade doesn't actually make the gun more accurate, it just reduces the chances of this shit happening. They actually coded in a chance for your shots to just fucking miss. Go way outside of the crosshair. And it's only for the pistols? No other weapon has this quirk. Who does this shit? Oh, right. Well, anyway, what the fuck was I talking about? Yeah, enemies, okay. The generic dude enemies may look unremarkable, but the challenge comes in their sheer variety. That section I touched on at the beginning only shows about half of the weapons and tactics they use. The challenge arises when you have to fight a mix of enemies, or enemies which individually mix these tactics. This dude has a bulletproof mask and an assault rifle. That's not nice. Alongside this dude buffet, you also have to contend with traps. No matter where you are, there are so many traps. There's a couple options you have for dealing with these. You can avoid them, disarm them, or bait enemies into them. Really, there's nothing too remarkable about them other than just how many of them there are throughout the entire game. Just make sure you're paying attention. If you ever see floating red flower petals, you're in the danger zone. Another thing the Evil Within has a ton of is boss fights. They're a real highlight of the game. A lot of survival horror games like this have this issue where boss fights essentially boil down to one of two things. You either shoot at it until it dies, or shoot the big glowing weak spot until it dies. The Evil Within breaks the mold somewhat by being unafraid to experiment with its bosses. Some of them are straightforward, but the best ones are those that force you out of your comfort zone. Laura, this game's poster girl, has one of the best boss fights in the game. Your gunshots do basically nothing to her, but she's heavily damaged by fire. So her boss fight boils down to kiting her into dead bodies and dropping matches on them to set her on fire, but as shown earlier, she has an insta-kill move. So whenever you drop a match while in painfully close proximity, there's always that tension of, if I mistime this by even half a second, I'm gonna get my face caved in. Or you can do what I did and rush the fire arrow upgrade for the crossbow and completely cheese her. I suppose it's for the best that your guns do nothing to her, since in later levels you'll run out of ammo a lot and the game will just keep giving you fucking green gel. I don't need your soup, goddammit, I need bullets! Pickle juice waterboarding aside, the bosses are easily the highest points of the game. Some of them are boring, but I can't think of any that are outright bad except for one that I can't talk about right now. So instead, let's talk about spooky shit. Parts of this game's horror aspect is delivered to you through these surreal, heavily scripted nightmare sequences. Now, when done correctly, these can be pretty scary, but in the Evil Within, they pretty much just exist to look cool and as a transition to get the player from level to level. Personally, I feel that the best horror is interwoven with and delivered via its gameplay, so as not to break the flow. This is something that the sequel actually does quite well, and I think it's a much scarier game for it. But now's not the time. Outside of that, the atmosphere is pretty solid and does a good job of slowly building tension, the moments where this feeling climaxes in the form of a big fight being major highlights. But unfortunately, this tension also culminates in much less enjoyable ways. This game has quite a few really trashy scream-in-your-face jump scares. Since the only enemy you fight is dudes, the game has a hard time catching you off guard, and whenever it does, it's usually with a boss fight. There is one exception though. One chapter has you working your way through a giant Resident Evil house. You shoot the bad guys and loot the stuff and it's all pretty normal, except randomly you'll be chased by an unkillable teleporting anime villain in a bathrobe who explodes your head if he touches you. This entire level is pure anxiety. This dude can pop up anywhere, at any time, including when you're fighting enemies. I'm honestly pretty conflicted about this. I like the feeling of paranoia that this provides, but in terms of actual gameplay, it can get really frustrating. After the first couple of nigh unavoidable deaths, it stops being scary and starts being a pain in the ass. Speaking of bathrobes and anime villains, it's high time I give some degree of context as to what the fuck is actually going on in this game. Does the evil within have a solid story to support all this insanity? No. No, it does not. The actual premise for the game is a bit of a spoiler, so I'll save that. All I can say for now is that you play as a grisly detective named Sebastian Castellanos. He's a lot more properly characterized in the sequel, and we'll get to that. But in this game, he's pretty much just a brick with a drinking problem. He's joined by two sidekick detectives, Joseph Oda, a by-the-books guy who is super into doing the right thing and never breaking the rules, who's also voiced by Yuri Lowenthal, because of course he is. And Julie Kidman, an anime character with a tragic backstory I can't get into because it's spoilers for the DLC. There's also Marcelo Jimenez, an old science boy whose very first line is some cryptic shit we can't possibly understand. Nope, no red flags here. And finally, there's the only character that I think is actually kind of well thought out. The teleports behind you nothing personnel kid, main villain, burn victim, boy genius, bathrobe enthusiast himself, Ruvik. There's some more minor characters, but they're not really worth mentioning, except Nurse Tatiana. She's alright. Not mentally, but she's an okay person. The dialogue between these characters ranges disjointedly from okay to literally porn tier, especially when these two are on the screen.
You should have just let them.
Huh?
What the hell? It's just a matter of time. It's better this way. What the fuck?
Dude, one of them is the pretty boy, no-nonsense, goody-two-shoes cop, and the other one is the grizzled, getting-too-old-for-this-shit cop. They are literally perfect for each other. Fucking kiss already! Happy Pride Month, by the way. The game opens with the detective squad and some cop that only exists to die, getting a call that some fucked up shit is going down at a hospital. You open the door and see what appears to be a still-in-progress workplace massacre, but instead of a disgruntled employee killing everyone, it's Ruvik. You watch him instant transmission 3 security guards through a camera before he literally teleports behind you and stabs you with a syringe. When you wake up, you're trapped in some kind of human butchery or meat processing plant or something. You escape, eventually, and reunite with your squad outside of the hospital, hijack an ambulance, and then reality just kinda breaks down around you. There's no explanation given, just a full-on 2012 style apocalypse, complete with cool action shots as well. And then after driving for an unspecified amount of time, you crash, pass out, and wake up in, Resident Evil 4. Seriously, it's a little village in the middle of the woods. How the fuck did we get here from an inner-city hospital so fast? Why did reality just stop working? What is the deal with the amazing bathrobe bandit? I can't say without getting into spoilers, so if you care about anything you've heard about thus far, skip to here. So you know all that stuff with the ambulance and the hospital and these detectives? Well, forget about all that because we need to talk about Ruvik. We need to talk about Ruvik, fucking hell. As you can probably guess, Ruvik isn't his real name. It's a shortened form of his full name, Ruben Victoriano. Ruben was the child of some filthy rich parents who didn't pay enough attention to him. This was an issue because he's quite a disturbed child. Difficulty relating to others, a general disregard for life, a very solitary lifestyle even as a child. His upbringing had all the hallmarks of creating a happy little sociopath. I can't use that word too much or else Shane Dawson will kick down my door. However, even disregarding all this, he was very intelligent and had an interest in psychology and anatomy, frequently doing autopsies on animals while they were still alive to learn how they worked, both physically and mentally. This is already pretty twisted, but it's gonna get way worse. He actually gets noticed by Marcelo Jimenez, somehow, who takes Ruben under his wing and teaches him about these scientific subjects without torturing animals. Nice. One day, Ruben is playing hide and seek or something with his sister Laura in a barn in the middle of a giant cornfield, when suddenly, some angry peasants grab torches and gasoline with the intent to burn the place down because the Victoriano family bought their farmland. The barn goes up in flames, Ruben is scarred for life both physically and mentally as the flames utterly ravage his body, and his sister sacrifices herself so he can escape. This event caused Ruben to become immensely spiteful, distancing himself from Jimenez and reality as a whole as he worked on a project of his own which ended up being called STEM. So what is STEM? It basically is like a Gary's Mod server, but even more nightmarish. One person's brain acts as a sort of host for this virtual reality, and a bunch of other people's brains connect to it and live in the setting conjured up via the host brain. The sequel goes a bit more into detail about how only certain people can be a host in this way. Even a fraction of self-doubt or skepticism can fuck up the entire simulation, collapsing it and killing everyone inside via brain death. So it goes on to explain that the only two groups of people that could conceivably host a STEM world over a long period of time are egotistical sociopaths and children. In The Evil Within 1, it's the former. Jimenez eventually found out about STEM and begrudgingly allowed Ruvik to continue his work on it in relative solitude, even though he wasn't above killing and torturing people in it just to see what would happen.
Aberrant brainwave patterns observed in subjects number 25 and 33, and now again in 55. The one common factor is a case history of dissociative identity disorder. Previous experiments on the prefrontal cortex led to degradation of sense of self, but there were unanticipated results here. Suicidal thoughts of alternate personalities exhibited as attacks on the core personality. As self-consciousness waned, a sort of stasis was achieved. Like two creatures sewn together and forced to live as one, eternally hating the other. Delicious.
It comes to light that Jimenez is part of a big boy umbrella corporation type group that calls itself Mobius, and for whatever reason, right before Ruben completes the project, they betray him. Mobius destroys Ruben's physical body in a way that doesn't cause him to die completely. His brain and higher functions are still active, but Ruben, the person, ceases to exist. And from there, they use his still functioning brain to host the STEM program.
By the time I realized Jimenez had betrayed me, it was too late. I was so close. He knew it. Knew that I was too focused to notice when he brought those men. They'd never gotten past my traps otherwise. Their device is a perversion of my own. The device I should have created. My data, my equipment, my theories, my mind. They replaced my husk of a body with a new dimension of torment.
This is the hell world that you're trapped in for most of the game. Trapped in the mind of a tortured, vengeful, mad scientist murderer. All of this is presented in a decent enough way. You see how all this happened through flashbacks, audio logs, and visiting locations of major importance to Ruben. The problem is that you don't find any of this out until like 2/3 of the way through the game, and everything else in the story is a complete mess. The first 6 hours or so is just you being teleported from location to location and occasionally seeing cutscenes to remind you that there's something going on. There's next to no continuity to the areas in the early parts of the game. There's one character that's constantly hinted at to be super important for some reason, but by the end literally nothing has happened with them, and it's like, what the fuck was the point of all that build-up? Sometimes the main characters turn into the haunted people for a bit, but then they don't, and then they just move on and never mention it again. How the fuck did Ruvik even trap the main cast in the STEM program when you have to physically connect to it via a cord? Yes, I know the DLC explains how this was possible, shut up. And just to put the cherry on it, the ending is a total slap in the nuts. The final boss fight is a turret section, followed by another turret section, followed by a QuickTime event. All the engaging boss design seen everywhere else is nowhere to be found in the game's most important boss fight. It sucks because, like, look at this area. The spectacle is pumped to the max. Your perception of reality is irrelevant as the environment twists and warps into non-Euclidean insanity. Buildings and massive wire-wrapped brains hover in midair, and you're being chased by a giant tentacle monster, and it's all being suspended above this giant pizza vortex. This is beautiful. I wish every day looked exactly like this. And then in the ending afterwards, like, nothing happens. You stomp on Ruvik's brain, which is pretty cool, but then you just walk out of the hospital. No epilogue, no nothing. No thanks. As expected of a Shinji Mikami title, beating the game unlocks a new Game Plus mode. It's really bare bones, and I didn't care for it. You get a couple of neat guns and a shit ton of green gel, but you can't play the game at a higher difficulty for some reason, so what's the point? But I'm not done here. I still got more to talk about. The Evil Within has 3 DLC mission packs: the Assignment, the Consequence, and the Excuse me. Can you shut the fuck up for a second? Thank you. Anyway, these DLCs are actually really cool. Instead of just being more of the same, they make an effort to do their own thing and experiment, each being very different from the main game. The Assignment and the Consequence are linked together, being a retelling of the events of the game but from the perspective of Julie Kidman, while the Executioner is, we'll get to that. I'm gonna start with the Kidman DLCs first. They have a much tighter gameplay scope, make significant effort to fix what was wrong with the story, and are overall more focused on the horror part of survival horror. The gameplay is significantly different to the main game. For most of these DLCs, you don't get any guns, and must instead rely on stealth and cunning to survive. Now, I normally am not a fan of horror games with no weapons where you just run and hide for pretty much any situation, but the Kidman DLCs are an exception. They typically have a lot more for the player to think about. For starters, you're usually expected to stealth around multiple enemies at once, but you still have ways of getting rid of them for good, even with no guns. You can pick up fire axes littered around the environment and have them function as a single-use stealth kill. Stealthy. Alternatively, you can pull some Kevin McAllister shit and lock the monsters in a closet. That's always funny. Whenever you do get caught, your best bet is usually to jump into an air vent and wait for the monsters to forget you exist. The enemy variety is actually pretty solid for such a short DLC. Occasionally you have to stealth around invisible enemies, but when you shine your flashlight on them, you can see them. There's a number of sections that see you stealthing around enemies that are completely blind, and those never failed to make me nearly curl up into the fetal position in my chair. Speaking of curling up into the fetal position, how could I not talk about Shade? Throughout both of these DLCs, you're stalked relentlessly by her. She's absolutely terrifying, and her stealth sections are some of the highest points of these DLCs. Moreover, she actually has a really interesting backstory. I'll save that for later though. I do have some minor issues. Because these DLCs are so short, some of their ideas feel very underdeveloped. The aforementioned invisible enemies, for example, they only show up for like 5 minutes and are never seen again. Maybe they're just really good at being invisible, I don't know. There's one level set on some really high building under construction, and there's a unique stealth takedown where you straight up body check a dude from behind for a free kill. It's hilarious, but it doesn't show up anywhere else. There's one moment near the start of the Consequence where your flashlight breaks and you have to rely on glow sticks. It's interesting, but again, this only lasts for like 20 minutes before you just get another flashlight. You have to have one because otherwise you couldn't make use of a core level progression mechanic. But even stranger, once you get the flashlight back, the glow sticks literally disappear from your inventory. You don't lose them in a cutscene or anything, you just straight up don't have them anymore. This kinda bugs me because... God, this is such a nitpick, but bear with me. Kidman always points the flashlight in whatever direction the camera is pointing, even when it's turned off. Since a lot of the areas are decently lit, I would frequently run around with it turned off, but Kidman is still just pointing it. Now here's why this bugs me. You can't holster the flashlight. You can holster weapons in the main game, you can put your lantern at your hip, but you're not allowed to put that flashlight away. And just to make this even more irrationally infuriating, you can holster the glow sticks? The button literally doesn't do anything when the flashlight is out, but here it... I'm just gonna stop. After beating each DLC for the first time, you unlock Kurayami difficulty, one of the most unique challenge modes I've ever seen for a game. Numbers-wise, everything is the exact same. Enemies do the same damage and appear in the same numbers. The challenge comes in a change to the game's ambiance. Every single ambient light source is completely removed. Have fun relying on your flashlight to get around when you need to stay out of sight. Mercifully, the enemies don't actually react to your flashlight. You can use it with relative impunity and it won't have any bearing on your detection. Does that make this challenge mode any less terrifying? Nope, not even slightly. Now, I really can't talk about the story at all without spoiling stuff, and there's also some more spoily gameplay stuff I want to talk about, so if you still want to avoid all that, skip to here. The assignment opens with a quote from Marcelo Jimenez, which implies that different people in the STEM program would see and experience things differently from each other. Yeah, there's gonna be a lot of retconning here. First of all, some more insights as to how this DLC slightly changes STEM's functionality. It's less of a nightmarish Gary's Mod server and more of a nightmarish mental communism. The core setting of the host brain acts as a foundation for the world, but each connecting person adds their own subconscious locations, experiences, and feelings to the mix, making the world bigger and more dense with each new connection. Included in this, however, are each person's ambitions, prejudices, and, most importantly, their fears. Think about all of your friends, family members, co-workers, classmates, anyone at all. Their phobias.
Was that the bite of 87?
Their hatreds.
What a fucking
Their desires.
Wow. Well,
All become yours all at once, with your respective feelings being added to the mix. With so many different conflicting ideas and feelings all being held inside the twisted perceptions of a mad scientist with no regard for human life, it's no wonder STEM is such a nightmarish clusterfuck. This added context wasn't really necessary, but incredibly welcome. The potential of STEM as a horror plot device is fucking dizzying. It's one of the coolest setups for a horror game I've ever seen. You might think me talking about it this much isn't important, but this added information is actually worth knowing going forward, and also I wanted to praise it because it's fucking sick. The main focus of our attention in both of these DLCs are Jimenez and Mobius Man. I know the wiki says his name is the Administrator, but fuck that, I'm calling him Mobius Man. Jimenez actually knew Ruben before he was involved with Mobius, and not the other way around like I believed initially. Mobius Man needs a way to control people. The reasons for this are a bit murky. He says it's so that humanity can share a consciousness, so that if one person's happy, everyone's happy. Or this could be a tissue-thin lie to hide this power-hungry suit's desire to control the world for his own gain. Either way, this is where Jimenez gets involved. STEM is a creation solely of Ruben's, but Jimenez showed it to Mobius Man because he knew it's exactly what he would want. Mobius' discovery of Ruben's existence was an accident, according to Jimenez. He wanted to keep Ruben hidden, most likely to take all the credit for his work, but that didn't pan out and Mobius and Ruben got a bit more personal. Unbeknownst to anyone, right before the STEM prototype was finished, Ruben had it programmed to only function when his brain was used as the host, throwing a wrench into the plans of Mobius Man and Jimenez. This is an explanation as to why Mobius put Ruben's brain in a jar, his instability being more of a hindrance to the STEM project, even though he was its original creator. In the eyes of Mobius, he was a problem, so they removed him, and Ruvik took his place. Jimenez finishes the STEM prototype at Beacon Mental Hospital and immediately begins subjecting its patients to the program for experimentation, interviewing them once they were pulled out. Things became problematic very quickly, however, when almost every single patient put into the program were belligerent, unintelligible messes when they were pulled out, a select few even dying. What little coherence there was being exhibited by the patients was always the same thing, the appearance of a mysterious hooded figure stalking them. A breakthrough was achieved one day when a single patient was able to remain completely lucid after being pulled out of the simulation and give a full recount of his experience. This patient, of course, was Leslie Withers. Leslie is a character that was in the main game and had a ton of mystery and intrigue built up for him that ultimately amounted to nothing. Jimenez keeps Leslie's existence a secret, intending to somehow replace Ruvik's brain with Leslie's, hoping to ease its more horrible aspects and experience it for himself. Unfortunately for Jimenez, this is not how things would go down. Despite his best efforts, Mobius finds out about Leslie, and in response, Jimenez panics and makes an extremely dumb decision. This dude cares about his clout with the Mobius Club so much that he puts himself and Leslie into the STEM program and turns it on with a wireless signal that he had been working on in secret, trapping himself, Leslie, the entire goddamn hospital, and a few of the surrounding acres in the STEM program in a way that you can't turn off without being sucked into the program. This is where you come in.
Do you stand with Mobius?
I do. I made my choice.
Yep, you heard that right. Kidman was an undercover Mobius agent the whole time. Mobius sends you with the other detectives with the mission to retrieve Leslie. Before sending you in, they inject you with something that will supposedly protect you from Ruvik's influence, but that's not the only purpose it serves. I'll talk about that later. You eventually discover that Ruvik also wants Leslie, but for a much more sinister reason.
Your people aren't the only ones counting on this boy. You need him to get out.
As do I. We're all their pawns, eventual victims. They killed me. They ripped me apart and took what they needed. I will destroy what they wish to control.
Ruvik has been slowly mind-wiping and possessing Leslie so that he can escape the STEM world and live on in Leslie's body. Now we have a conflict of interest. Mobius needs Leslie alive, but Kidman now wants to kill him so that Ruvik can't escape. Mobius Man realizes what she's up to and intervenes. The assignment ends with a pretty cool chase sequence where Mobius Man chases you through some tunnels and then bam, cliffhanger ending. We move on to the consequence, the one where you get a gun for 10 minutes and then lose in a cutscene. Those 10 minutes are well spent, however, in a boss fight against Shade. You can't shoot when she's looking at you, but shooting her in the light is the only way to do damage. I was kinda surprised to see her offed so early, and I guess now is as good a time as any to mention that Shade is meant to be an abstract representation of Kidman herself. She's unarmed, wears white, has a cone-shaped light source, and is constantly moaning for
Leslie.
They either incorporated her appearance into the story or the other way around. Either way, it's pretty cool. After getting scared straight by Mobius Man, Kidman is conflicted on what to do about Leslie, coming around to the idea that she can maybe stop Ruvik before he possesses Leslie completely. Kidman eventually tracks Leslie down and, in the moment, decides he can't be allowed to live. This cutscene plays in the main game and in the DLC, but Kidman and Sebastian perceive the situation differently. I'll play both of them one after the other and you'll see what I mean.
It's not your fault. I'm sorry.
Stop.
You don't understand. You don't know what he'll become.
I do. I've seen it.
You don't understand what Ruvik is after.
So tell me, what is he after?
He's after Leslie.
What, he needs to finish his science project?
Don't patronize me. I have orders. I can't let him have this boy. Leslie is the only one he can... It's not your fault. I'm sorry.
Stop! You're making a terrible mistake.
You don't understand. You don't know what he'll become.
We know exactly what he'll become. That's why we need him.
You don't understand what Ruvik is after.
Ruvik is a corpse.
He's after Leslie.
And so are we. And you're more afraid of him than us?
Don't patronize me. I have orders. But I can't let him have this boy. Leslie is the only one who can...
This right here is why I'm talking at such great length about the story of DLC that can be completed in 4 hours. This scene in the original game was vapid and completely nonsensical. Sebastian is literally pretending to know what he is talking about just so Leslie won't die. But, as stated previously, in the base game Leslie had nothing solid stated about him, only vague speculations. This cutscene disparity is a microcosm for how the DLCs managed to take the undisciplined shit show that was the original game's story and not only salvage it into something coherent, but something also incredibly compelling. Kidman reaches the hospital shortly after this event and discovers that her mission is a complete sham. The injection she received at the very start of the game not only made her immune to Ruvik's psychic bullshit, but also made her vulnerable to Mobius Man's psychic bullshit. She was merely an experiment to see if Mobius could control an agent and keep them loyal using fear alone. Upon learning this information, Kidman is pissed. What follows is an intense sequence of going ham with a sawn-off shotgun and, holy shit, a final boss fight that's actually good. This fight has 3 phases. Phase 1 consists of being surrounded by teleporting identical shadow clones. Only one of them can be damaged, and that one is also the only one that can attack. You have to keep your nerves in check and wait for the right moment to not waste ammo. When enough shots have landed on the main guy, Phase 2 begins. You're trapped in a dark maze, and assaulted by red copies of yourself that move with this really unnerving TV fast-forward effect. They can grab you and slash you with an axe. Don't let them get close and don't get cornered and you're good. If you run out of ammo, get more from focusing on the Mobius symbols. Just don't stand in one place for too long. When enough damage is dealt, the phase ends. Phase 3 is very simple. Shoot the glowing weak spots, shattering each hand. When they're both broken, finish the main guy off.
You think you've won, but have you? You don't know anything. I am with you. I will always be with you now.
You don't know me. I'm stronger than you think.
This ending is ambiguous and quite sinister. First of all, it's heavily implied Ruvik did in fact successfully escape STEM in Leslie's body. Second of all, Mobius learned that it can influence the loyalty of an agent through fear alone, as Kidman is seen with the mark on her hand where she previously had none. Kidman wakes up Sebastian from his simulation because of, sequel reasons, and finally, an unsettling quote that I don't know what to make of before the credits roll.
Leave that one. And those two. They're not going anywhere.
No one is.
These DLCs managed to take a story full of underdeveloped plot threads, nothing characters, and utterly pointless situations and create something truly memorable and unique. I don't think I could ever accurately convey how impressive that is, and now I'm kind of exhausted. I hope you enjoyed watching. I forgot. There's a boss fight in The Evil Within where you fight the Keeper, a dude with a hammer and a safe on his head. He was a boss fight that I really enjoyed, and seems I'm not the only one. Like the Kidman DLCs, the Executioner flips the gameplay of the original on its head, but in the complete opposite direction, being a first-person perspective hack-and-slash spectacle fighter thing where you play as the Keeper. It's a shameless celebration of gratuitous ultra-violence. You're no longer trapped in a room with monsters. They are trapped in a room with you. You are the local man who is too angry to die. You can't be playing a survival horror game anymore because now you are the survival horror. Let's get one thing straight right now. This DLC balls hard. It is utter insanity and I love it to pieces. But it's got some problems. Let's take it from the top. Like I said, this is a first-person thing. The general idea is to bonk the enemy until their health gets low enough to either grab them or execute them. Executions are self-explanatory. Finish the enemy off in a ridiculously gory display. Grabbing them lets you carry them in a chokehold for as long as you want. Press the button again to throw them. I love how they fly like you attached a Gary's mod thruster onto them. It's just ridiculous. You can throw enemies into spikes for a different flavor of gory kill, or put your bowling skills to the test and throw enemies at each other, making them vulnerable to more executions and grabs. Further adding to this ludicrousy are the enemies that explode when you throw them. That's something. Killing enemies and smashing breakables gives you memory tokens, your upgrade currency, which you spend at this safe right here. The boss fights are the primary source of memory tokens that you'll gain. They're all bosses from the main game, but they took the time to adjust their movesets and animations to make more sense for this DLC. Big ups. There's also an arena which you can run as many times as you want. It spawns monsters and gives you a decent amount of tokens for completing it, pretty much just for if you want to grind a bunch, not much to say about this. There's a variety of different upgrades and tools which you can use on your enemies, but this is where some of the problems start to arise. The core of the gameplay is rock solid. There's not much to it, but what's there works well and is satisfying, if a bit poorly explained. I could be completely mistaken, but I don't think the game ever tells you that you can dodge by pressing the sprint button in any direction other than forward. You steadily unlock more weapons and upgrades as you progress. The barbed wire trap in particular is pretty cool, being able to pin enemies in place for a free grab or execute. This tool is readily available and works well in gameplay, but it's an exception in this regard. It boggles my mind just how many upgrades and weapons there are that seem to go against the core game loop. Yeah, you could play the absurd monster power fantasy game and introduce the monster's brain matter to the underside of your boot, chainsaw that guy in half, throw that dude into that spike wall, throw that explosive dude into a crowd. Or you could sit back and throw dynamite. Or Molotovs. Or rockets. But why? This DLC has already set up that I'm playing as a humanoid meat grinder. I want to taste the blood, goddammit, not just watch it happen from a distance. The main game already does that anyway. The aforementioned tools aren't nearly as readily available as the wire trap. You can pick those up off of enemies and breakables, but these you have to buy them with memory tokens, and I'd sooner use those on a permanent upgrade rather than a cheese one. The model for the wire trap pickup is the same as the trap parts that you use to craft crossbow bolts in the main game. Why not just have another sort of global crafting resource that you could use to make all of these? Almost every single time I unlocked an upgrade in this game, I ended up going, yep, I'm never gonna use that. There's so much potential that goes unrealized. You can actually grab things other than enemies, like this chair. Or this chair. Or this chair? Why can you only grab chairs? What about these torch sconces? They look like they could cause some damage. Why not pick up the weapons of dead enemies? Welcome to my demented brain's wishlist for this 1 hour long DLC. There's so many means of destruction, but so little cohesion, so little reason to do anything other than bonk stuff with the hammer, and for some people that's enough. Personally, I think that this pretty experimental DLC could have been a lot more, but as it stands now, the game's focus is too scattered, populated too heavily by abilities that feel more like one-off toys than meaningful character upgrades. And that's all this DLC is, really, a big dumb toy chest. It's only an hour long, but that 1 hour is a complete reptile-brained blast, and I don't think I'd ever go back for a second playthrough, but I greatly enjoyed my time spent. What about the story, I hear you hypothetically ask? Like, dude, what story? You play as a guy with a box on his head. Okay, fine, but I'm not getting into spoilers because this video is way too goddamn long. It's a father-save-daughter story told entirely through journal entries, flashbacks, and 2 cutscenes with no voice acting or animation, and it's still more interesting and memorable than the entire sequel. No, not yet. Fucking hell. Okay, is it over? I didn't forget anything this time, right? I think I'm good. You can buy The Evil Within on Steam for 20 bucks. On its own, for that price, it's pretty good. For 25 bucks, you can get all the DLC included, and at that price point, purely looking at value for money, it's borderline highway robbery. Highly recommend this version over vanilla. And if you're really on the fence about all this, the game has a demo that lets you play through the first 3 chapters as much as you want for free, so you can try it instead. That's all for now. Evil Within 2 video eventually. This video ended up being way longer than I thought it was going to be. I really need to figure out how to talk about a game's story without just doing a play-by-play of the entire thing. But the Evil Within 2 video will happen. I already got a little bit of footage and my hard drive is currently crying. See ya then.